Thank you so much, Yaniv. It is a pleasure to be here. I have in the audience many of my Talmidim from Yoshuv, whom I forced to come tonight. Bring your own audience, otherwise you're in trouble. I found that out before. Chazaq is an amazing organization, and it's a credit to all of its leaders and all of its participants. And I am honored to be here. I hope that we can do some justice to this topic. It's a very broad topic, and I don't think we can cover it all at once. In other words, what I'm trying to say is I'm trying to get an invitation back here again for part 2. But we'll try the best that we can. Let me begin with the story. It seems that there was a rabbi and his wife who were cleaning up the attic one day. And the rabbi sees this shoebox, and the shoebox is taped together. And he asks his Rebbitzin, "What is this shoebox?" And she says, "It's nothing, it's nothing, it's something very personal. Please don't open that." And they have been married for 35 years. He's been a rabbi in the community for 25 years. And they've never had any secrets. What could this be? But he abides by his wife's wishes, good husband that he is. Sure enough, 2 days later, his wife is out shopping. He can't control his curiosity. He runs up to the attic and he pulls down the shoebox and he untapes it and he opens it up. And inside he finds, to his surprise, 3 eggs and $2,000 cash in $1 bills. And now he's really baffled. What could this be about? His wife comes home. He admits his guilt. He betrayed her trust. He opened the box. But what is this all about? So she says, "Okay, I didn't want to tell you, but I'm going to tell you. You've been a rabbi for 25 years. That's many drushas, many speeches along the way. Well, every time you told a bad drusha, you gave a bad speech, I would put an egg in the shoebox." So he says, "That's not so bad. 25 years, 3 eggs? Nishka firlich. It's not so bad." She says, "I'm not finished. And every time I had a dozen eggs, I would sell it for $1. So I hope that tonight's lecture will not end up in a shoebox. I hope that for each of you, in each person's individualistic way, something that I will be zocheh to say will make an impact, will make its mark, will be penetrating, and will be something that you can take home with you. Let's begin with the importance of a name. For that matter, the name of anything, any entity. The Maharal says that the name of something identifies its essence. There was a break-in in a house, and the thieves burst into the frightened couple's bedroom, and they point the gun at the woman's head, about to shoot her, to take her life. Thieves no longer are satisfied merely to steal. They want blood. And he's about to shoot, and he says to the woman, "What's your name?" And she says nervously, my name is Elizabeth." And he pulls the gun away. He says, "You're very lucky. Elizabeth was my mother's name, and I loved my mother. I'm going to spare your life." And then he points the gun at her husband, and he says, "What's your name?" And he says, "My name is Harry, but my friends call me Elizabeth." What is the name that in Lashon HaKodesh we refer to when speaking about marriage? Nisuin. Nisuin. Nisuin is an expression of nasui, uplifted, something that rises high. Marriage, theoretically and in practice, is an expression of something that lifts us up, that brings us to a high place. It's also an expression of nisayon. Nisayon. V'sa neis l'kabeitz galu yoseinu. To lift up a banner, a high, to declare the return of the exile. Every challenge, every nisayon is an opportunity for a person to become bigger, to reach inside of himself and to bring out kochot hanefesh that Hashem gave him, that enables him to expand and expand and expand. Nisuin, raised up, nisayon, a banner, together, when a husband and wife work as one, ishto kegufa, toward a shleimus, to try to actualize the kochot hanefesh that Hashem gave them, to bring out from within all of that wonderful potential that unfortunately in the world is so lost and untapped. The result of this is nothing less than miraculous. The result of these two people working together in Nisuin is the broadening and the stretching and the actualizing of that wonderful potential towards something called Shleimut. And the Rabbanu Shalom gets no greater nachas ruach, no greater joy than when he sees mankind, and especially his children, realizing their potential, his dreams for them. Avram de Lesata, Avram de Le'ela. The angel called out Abraham twice. There are two Abrahams. There's Avram below and Avram above. And when Avram passed the most difficult of tests, the Akedah, and he was able and willing to sacrifice his son till he was stopped by the angel, a voice declared from heaven, Avram, you have actualized all of your kochot. Everything that was expected from you in heaven has been met by you on this earth. Avram de Lesata of below and Avram de Le'ela of above is one. This is what we hope to accomplish through marriage. Our attitude is much different than the world. Our attitude has to do with eternity. Our attitude has to do with the Shekhinah. Our attitude has to do with godliness. It has to do with things that transcend the limitations of this world. And of course, through marriage and through the love of a husband and wife for one another, through the Ishtay Kegufa and Bala Kegufa, the meshing and the merging and the fusing of a man and a woman as one, as we see it, Ishto Kegufa Mamash, we come to understand what it means not only to love one another, but what it means to be totally devoted to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Obviously, everything on this earth is a parable of sorts to lead us toward that Ahavat Hashem. So it's a broad topic, and I'm not going to begin with dating, even though the topic is dating and marriage. I'm going to begin with marriage. Maybe we'll end up in dating. Maybe we'll never get there. Who wants a bad date anyway? But I think by discussing marriage, we'll understand what's essential to the dating process. And we'll certainly inevitably understand the many hazards along the way. Let's talk about the Super Bowl. Super Bowl? Well, in order to understand the chashivas of anything, we have to talk about priorities. And there are priorities in the way we approach marriage. Priorities in the way we approach dating. What are we looking for? What are we searching for? What are we hoping for? What are our dreams? There was a woman sitting next to an empty seat at the Super Bowl. So the man behind her was quite nosy, and he said, "Excuse me, ma'am, but it was right before kickoff." He said, "Whose seat is that? An empty seat at the Super Bowl?" So she said, "It's my husband's seat." He said, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm so nosy. I shouldn't ask so many questions. Can I ask you another question? Isn't he coming?" She said, No. He's passed away." He says, "Oh, I'm so sorry. Your husband passed away. I'm so sorry. Can I ask you another question? I know it's none of my business, but didn't any of the relatives want to take his seat?" "Oh, no," she says, "they all insisted on going to the funeral." Now, that's supposed to be a humorous story. I mean, it's very funny. It's about death, funerals. It's very good. But we're not so far off at times from misplaced priorities. We really can get quite twisted and distorted, and I speak about myself. We live in an environment where priorities are so topsy-turvy and backwards and distorted. Rahmana litzlan, Hashem should help us. That it's not surprising that marriage is one of many victims to those misplaced priorities. How is one supposed to go into this relationship with an understanding of permanence, with one that is perpetual, with one that even links to eternity, when his priorities are so twisted, when his priorities are based on the movies that he's seen and the Hollywood preferences? Not to say for a moment that we don't need to be attracted to one another, not to say for a moment that beauty is not a real thing, but of course there's so much more depth to it. It's not so superficial as they see it. So I want to try to approach this subject of marriage with the letter C. We're going to use C's. Why not A? Start with A, B, C, because I feel bad for C. They never get a chance. It always starts with A and maybe B. And C stands for Chazaq, right? That's the organization. 13 C's that are important in marriage. Why 13? Yud Gimel Midas. The Yud Gimel Midas of marriage, which relate to the Yud Gimel Midas of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. If we were to emulate the 13 Midas of Hashem, we wouldn't have any problems in our marriages. Mahu chanun afato chanun, mahu rachum afato rachum. Let us be like him. 13 is begematria echad, one. Oneness is what it's all about, to really become one, to become one entity. I tell students very often who are getting married, when you talk to your wife, don't come back and tell me, I'm such a tzaddik. I listened to my wife talk about her day with the kids for an hour and a half. She talked about this. I wasn't interested in the least. And I'm such a tzaddik. I should get a special medal of honor for this. And I say to him, what are you talking about? You're not about chesed. You're not kind. That's not what marriage is about. When your wife is speaking to you, it's as if you are speaking to yourself. Did you ever deny yourself the opportunity to think of or to verbalize another opinion that you had? This is you. Ish toike gufa echad. It's oneness. Let us begin. 13 C's. Let's see if we can remember them all. I actually mixed in another 13 or 14. I can't even count them anymore. C for contrast. Contrast and compare. Let's contrast and compare our marriages with their marriages. Let's look at the world, a secular world where the institution of marriage is becoming obsolete, Rahman al-Islam, where no longer is a person willing or maybe even capable of making the sacrifices that are essential to actually give to another person, to step out of the box of the me, give me, all for me, everything's for me, and focus on another person. Think about the anu mashkimin v'hei mashkimin. We get up early and they get up early. There's so many differences in general between Yiddishkeit, between a Torah way of life, between that which we are privileged to be servants to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, as opposed to a world where it's so superficial and so empty, so bankrupt. Boy looks for a girl at bar, buys drink, right? Everything's physical, nothing intellectual even at first, emotional. We, of course, the physical is not till marriage. We have to develop a relationship, a rapport. That intellectual relationship has to develop to something that's more emotional, more trusting, more sharing. And then the physical with marriage. And then the bonding of halacha. The bonding of even Hilchos Nida, which is separation, is so bonding, if you think about it. And Shabbos and Yontav in preparation, and children, Chinuch Habonim. And Shleimus, eternity. An eternity that one strives for together with his wife, together with her husband. Because this is not just a game. It's not trial and error. It's not let's just move in together, Rahman al-Islam. This is a fulfillment of the tafkid and the tachlis of what HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants from us. To utilize every ounce of koyach that we have within, to bring it out. And together we complement one another. But marriage has a bad name. Has a bad name in the world. And unfortunately that's trickled down and affected us. And we look at it with somewhat of a negative eye. They were contrasting the Reagan years and the Obama years. And someone said when Ronald Reagan was president, there was the famous comedian Bob Hope, and there was the famous country western singer Johnny Cash, and there was the entrepreneur Steve Jobs. And now in the Obama years, there's no hope, there's no cash, and there's no jobs. And people look at marriage that way as well. No hope, It won't work. Maybe we'll try it. We're not even going to try it. If we do try it, let's practice for a few years without commitment. And by us, it's totally different. It's all about commitment. It's not just a commitment to one another. It's a commitment to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's a commitment to the Torah. It's a commitment to our purpose. It's a commitment to eternity. It's so much deeper. It's so much more bonding. There's a tremendous glue. But they gave it a bad name, and they told us, get married, but expect the worst. Like the story of the man was preparing the guest room in his house, and his wife comes in and she can't figure out why in the world is her husband fixing up the beds in the guest room. He never helps in the house. She says, what are you doing? He says, well, I'm fixing up the guest room for your mother. Your mother's coming to visit. She says, my mother's in the hospital in the intensive care unit. You know that. She's not doing very... As a matter of fact, you were just in the hospital. You were just there. He says, I know. And as I was leaving the hospital, the doctor told me to expect the worst. We're told to expect the worst. Expect the worst. It's not going to work. Now they have prenuptial agreements, and maybe there's a reason for a prenuptial agreement, and maybe it saves a lot of heartache and agmas nefesh. But the idea that we start a marriage by beginning to talk about the ending of the marriage can't be too good. It's not exactly the most positive approach. Nonetheless, we have a Torah. We have mitzvahs. We have a God. We have a Shekhinah. We have a Kadosh Baruch Hu. We're not afraid of it. We're not going to let what they say, that Lashon Hara, that slander, not that we don't have our problems, everything trickles down. It's a gullus, a difficult gullus. But we have to know, and we believe with an absolute confidence, be'emunah shlema, that our marriages will last forever. And we're committed to that. And we're going to put every ounce of energy into it to make sure that they do. And to make sure that we indeed become one. And we indeed strive for shleimus together. C, number 2, communication. You knew communication was going to come up somewhere. Everybody talks about communication. To communicate, to be candid, to be open. Not everyone's good at it. You have to be a good listener to be a good communicator. You have to be trusting. You have to be sensitive. You have to step outside of yourself. Someone once said about the Gemara in Brachos that says, in Eretz Yisrael, when someone got married, they would ask the question, Motza or Moitze? Is your marriage going well? Represented by a pasuk that says, Motza, Isha, Motza, Tov. He who has found a wife has found good. Or are things not going so well? Represented by a pasuk that says, Motzei ani mar mimaves eso isha. I find a woman more bitter than death. Doesn't sound very complimentary. What could be the pshat? So someone once offered a pshat, and I think it's very, very poignant. Matzah isha matzah tov. That's the truth. There's nothing better than a good wife. She is everything for him. He's lost without her. Moitzei ani. When the ani is involved, when the I is involved, when I find, when it's still about me, when either partner is focused on themselves, then it could be mar mimovis. It could be terrible. But that doesn't mean it's terrible. But what it does mean is that if we are going to allow society to affect us, and this self-orientation of a gullus, where everyone is in it for himself, and no one can give to the other person, which is antithetical to everything we believe about the sacredness of marriage, then we're in trouble indeed. Moitzei ani. I find mar mimavis, not only eso isha, but eso ish as well. If either party is focused on the ani, we're in a difficult situation. There was a generation that built a tower. They tried to fight God, the Dar Haflaga. The Dar Haflaga thought that they could wage war with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. They thought, it's my own strength, my own power. They didn't attribute it to God, they attributed it to themselves. It was all about I. And their punishment was that Hashem confused their languages so that they could not communicate. Why was that their punishment? How was that midah keneged midah, one measure for another? They tried to fight God, so they're punished with confused languages, without communication, unable to pass a brick because instead they'd have a hammer thrown at them. But the answer is very simple. Because real communication, when a person is a communicator, so the first and foremost in his mind is the truth about HaKadosh Baruch Hu. If he's denying the truth about HaKadosh Baruch Hu, then he's not communicating. Something's off. Something's wrong. There's something missing. He doesn't understand something. It's not going in. And it's not going out. And communication demands both of that. So they were punished with a lack of communication for daring to challenge the truth about HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Our communication with our partners is essential. And communication doesn't mean giving in. And communication doesn't mean not being able to speak. And communication doesn't mean hiding things. Communication means to discuss. Communication means to sometimes disagree respectfully. Communication means to listen meaning to consider, to really give strong consideration to what the other person is saying. That's communication. Communication means to actually express what you feel and not just mumble a few words. And if you're not good at it, you have to become good at it. You have to learn how to communicate. Not everyone is innately blessed with every talent in the world. You learn how to do it. Why I don't want to learn? You should learn. You must learn. This relationship is crucial. Crucial to you as a person. Crucial to you as a unit. Crucial to you as servants of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Crucial to you as those who endeavor to actualize all of their potential. C, number 3, compliment. Compliment and then compliment some more. And when you're finished complimenting, then continue to compliment. Complimenting, no, someone's going to say, now I can't say I love you because if I say it too much, it cheapens it. It cheapens. I save it for every 15 years. Doesn't cheapen it. Marriage is like going to the dentist. Huh? If you've ever been to the dentist with an exposed nerve, where the decay is very deep and the dentist is drilling, and it's so sensitive, and he tells you, you're doing good, just a little bit more. I'm finished the drilling, now I'm going to put in the filling, and he asks for all those wonderful instruments like excavator, which certainly calms your nerves. But you know you're almost finished. You know it's getting better. The closeness of a couple is such that they're exposed to one another. As close as they are, and as dedicated as they are, and as loving as they might be, their nerves are exposed and sensitive. If there isn't that constant chizuk, that constant compliment, that constant insurance of one's feelings, of one's love, of one's respect, then a nerve is going to be touched the wrong way. Nothing is cheapened. It's not always so easy to compliment. Again, not everyone's good at it, but you have to learn how to be good at it. There was a British fellow who married an American girl. And it was the first week of their marriage, the Sheva Brachos. And he wanted to start out the marriage on the right foot. So his wife was getting dressed for the Sheva Brachos. And when she was ready, she asked him, how do I look? And he wanted to really compliment her. And he said, why, you look like £1,000,000. He meant dollars, of course. The Gemara talks about how we should dance in front of the chassan and kala. Keitzan meraktin lifnei hakala. Right? Everybody knows that song. It's actually a brisa that's quoted in the Gemara in Ksubos. How should one dance in front of the kala? Rashi interestingly says, he doesn't say, should you do the twist? Should you do the, the mashed potatoes? I'm a little behind on the dances, I'm sorry. He says, what should you say when you dance before the kala? Which word should you say? Indeed, the Gemara in Bracha says, Igur debehi lulei mili. The main reward for going to a wedding are the words of encouragement that you say to the chassan kala. Wonderful chassan, wonderful kala, wonderful family. Everyone is to give their words of encouragement as they dance, as they are misameach. How does one dance in front of the chassan and kala? This emphasis on words is to teach a message to the chassan and kala and to all of us. Start your marriage with good words, with upbeat words, with positive words, with encouraging words, with complimentary words, with loving words, with words of chizuk that give strength to one another constantly. So then someone will say, no, that's just Shana Rishona, the first year. After that, you're off the hook. Not true. Shana Rishona is your entire life. Your whole life should be a Shana Rishona. Your whole life you should be like newlyweds. And give that chizuk. Miraktin, how do you dance? Is a word that also can mean to sift. There's a malacha on Shabbos of the 39 malachas, sifting. It's called mirakhed. To sift means to separate the purities from the impurities, the good from the bad. Ketza miraktin l'fnei hakala. How do you turn your marriage into something that's refined and aristocratic and noble? It's with words. It's the words that you say to one another, and how you say it, and how often you say it. And again, it has to be learned by many people. They may be a product of parents that were not good at that. They may not have seen it in their lives. They may not be comfortable with it. But I tell you, for whatever it's worth, that this is an ikar. It's so important to this relationship. C number 4, to commiserate. Commiserate means, I had to look it up, to sympathize, to identify with, to empathize, to be one in a sense. A man walks into a bar and it's a quiet day in the bar, and he says to the bartender, what's going on? And he says, well, he sees that there's only one other customer in the bar. So he says, it's quiet, only one other customer, I'm going to go talk to him. So he goes over to the guy's table and he says, how you doing? He says, can I buy you a drink? He says, sure. He says, where are you from? He says, I'm from Omaha, Nebraska. And the other guy says, I can't believe it. I'm from Omaha, Nebraska. Look at that. An empty bar, just the two of us, and we're both from Omaha, Nebraska. A drink on the house to Omaha, Nebraska. And then he says to the guy sitting at the table, what school did you go to? He said, I went to PS 159. He says, I can't believe it. I went to PS 159. A drink on the house to PS 159. What year did you graduate? Graduated in 1967. I can't believe it. I was in your class in 1967. That's unbelievable. Who is your English teacher? Mrs. Taylor. I had Mrs. We were in the same class. A drink to Mrs. Taylor. Finally, another patron walks into the bar and he says to the bartender, how's it going today? He says, it's been pretty quiet. And then the bartender points over to the two guys. He says, oh yeah, the Johnson twins are drunk again. You've spoken to twins. I'm sure you've asked the question, did your mother always dress you the same? Do you feel a certain special relationship? And they often do. A certain closeness. Husband and wife are more than twins. Husband and wife are blending into one. It doesn't happen automatically, but it needs to happen. And when it happens, it's the most beautiful symphony in the world. And through it, a person can understand another Gemara in Ksubas. In that very same sugya where it discusses what you should say in front of the Kala, Beis Shammai says, say it as it is. Kala k'moy shehi. Don't lie. Don't embellish. Say exactly what she is. You'll find something nice to say it. But don't lie. And Beis Hillel says, no, say Kala noe v'chasuda. Right? The Kala is beautiful and she's pious. And we all know that Beis Hillel is right. Why? Because the halacha follows Beis Hillel? Maybe. Because the song goes that way. That's a pretty good proof. Did you ever hear anyone sing Kala Kemo Shehi? Kala noah v'chasuda is how we paskin. That is the law. But Beis Shammai says to Beis Hillel, what are you doing? What are you doing? You can't lie. It says in this past week's parasha, Midvar Sheker Terchag. It doesn't even say don't lie. It says more than that. Distance yourself from a lie. Or if you lie, you'll become even more distant from Hashem. What if she is lame, Rachmana litzlan? What if she's blind? What if she's not very beautiful? What if she just did 30 years in Rikers Island? You're still going to say Kala noah v'chasuda? Isn't that a lie? So Beis Hillel says, let me ask you a question. Someone buys a new suit, a new dress, a new sheitel, a new house, a new car. Yishbechena be'enov or yigochena be'enov. Should you praise it? Or should you say, I can't believe you bought that. Oh my gosh, what did you pay for that? That's terrible. Can you still give it back? Of course you should praise him. Beautiful dress, beautiful suit. You look wonderful. La'olam, he concludes, Tehei daito sha'adam mu'reves mabrias. A person's mindset has to always be intermingled, inextricably linked to others. He must be so sensitive, using the expression that we're familiar with, to put himself in the other person's shoes. To this chassan, this kala is beautiful. And to this kala, this chassan is beautiful. It matters not what he thinks. The greatest truth is to understand the depth of the situation. It's not always what it appears to be on surface. And this lesson is taught to us in the very discussion of dancing before the chassan and kala, because this is a foundation of marriage. A foundation of marriage, that the chassan and the kala, the husband and the wife, must be sensitive to one another, inextricably linked together as one, always thinking where the other person's coming from, focused on their foundation, not his own. That breeds tremendous success. The Johnson twins are drunk again. We have to be drunk together in a good way. Drunk together in simcha and joy and ecstasy, in the joy of being one. C number 5, commitment. We're a throwaway society. We used to buy a few vacuum cleaners each year. And that was before we had a carpet. And every time we picked up a nail, the vacuum cleaner would break. And I'd take it into the appliance shop. And for $30, they were happy to fix it. Till he finally told me, after about 5 vacuum cleaners, obviously I wasn't buying the most expensive one, that the fan is made out of plastic. They're made to break. If it takes in any metal, it will break. Plastic will bend, and then it doesn't work. You try to fix anything today, they'll tell you, go buy a new one. Don't fix it. When I was young, people still fix things. Why should we fix a marriage? We're not committed to fixing anything. We just throw it out, or we even start off that way, trial and error. Are we doing the best we can? I remember a story about a Jewish crook. His name was Bugsy Goldberg. Bugsy Goldberg was a maximum security prison. Maybe you know him. No, okay, that's good. He was in for grand larceny, for theft, for attempted murder, for wife beating, everything, you name it, he was there. And his father, nonetheless, father's always a father, he missed his son. And he's writing his son Bugsy a letter. It's springtime, and especially this time of the year, he misses his son, and he writes, Dear Bugsy, I remember how this time of year you and I would dig up the garden and plant the vegetables for the tomatoes and the cucumbers and the green peppers. And now I'm older and alone and you're not here. I miss you so much. I wish you were here. Love, Dad. A few days later, he gets a letter from the maximum security prison from his son, Bugsy. Dear Dad, whatever you do, don't dig up the garden. That's where I buried all the bodies. Oh my God. The next day, 2 vans pull up, FBI. 20 men get out with shovels and they start digging up the garden. Obviously, they intercepted the letter. They find nothing. A few days later, he gets a letter from his son in prison. Dear Dad, by now the garden should be all dug up. It was the best I could do under the circumstances. We have to ask ourselves if we are we doing the best we can? We don't have to ask ourselves because we probably know the answer. We're probably not. We're probably not because we don't want to, but we're conditioned already to not even try. We're victims, in a sense. Victims of a society that says, don't try, don't be foolish, give up. Look at the statistics. Why should you? But we don't believe in that. We don't go by statistics. Ein mazel Yisrael. We go by a Kodesh Baruch Hu. Kodesh Baruch Hu is with us. In a marriage where a couple is focused on one another, the Shekhinah is brought in. And with that Shekhinah there, we can transcend the limitations of this world. And we can certainly transcend the limitation imposed upon us by a gullus that is mindless, that is brainless, that is empty and superficial. We want to become that older couple, helping each other down the street, having shared 90 years of marital bliss. We want to be Rabbi Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, who said at his wife's levaya that he doesn't have to ask mechila because they never had a disagreement. And that's unusual and not to be expected, but at least something to dream for. C number 6, kavod. Kavod is a Hebrew word. It's not really spelled with a C, but I was desperate. Kavod means respect. You remember the comedian that talked about, I don't get no respect. He used to say, when I was a kid, I asked my dad if I could go skating on the frozen pond. He said, why don't you wait till the weather warms up? He said that when I was a kid, I once got lost at the shopping mall, and I was crying. So I ran to the security guard, and I said, do you think that I'll ever be reunited with my parents? And he looked at me and said, with so many places for them to hide, I doubt it. And he said, when I was a kid, my parents taught me how to cross the street. They said, son, before you cross the street, I want you to look both ways, up and down. And this comedian, his shtick was to talk about not receiving any respect. But unfortunately, it's probably a sad commentary on the generation, because we're not good at giving respect. We think it takes away from our own self-esteem, and that suffers already. We're afraid to, therefore, give anything to anybody else. My Rebbe used to say, Rabbi Freifeld, Zecher Tzaddik Livracha, so many times, probably 100 times, I heard it, that you have to say Shalom Aleichem to people. Someone's in the Beis Medrash, in the shul, a stranger, it's as if he doesn't exist until you recognize him. Kavod is an expression of kaved. Kaved means weight. You show that you recognize his weight, his presence. You ignore him, then you've rendered him invisible. Like the nurse who ran into the doctor and said, doctor, you must come quickly. There's a man outside who thinks he's invisible. And the doctor says, tell him that I can't see him right now. We make people invisible by ignoring them, or just not being machshav them, or I don't like the way they look. Right away we evaluate them. We already have our opinion formulated. And when the lack of kavod enters into a marriage, and one spouse or the other feels that they're not respected, it's destructive. And how does that happen? Well, if one is talking to the other and they're not listening, that's a lack of kavod. If one is trying to communicate with the other and the other isn't interested, that's a lack of kavod. We have different means of kavod. A husband is obligated to honor his wife more than himself. In other ways, a wife honors her husband. She usually is the one who prepares the meals for him or serves the dinner to him. We work together in this kavod. There's a mutuality in it. We're not supposed to run after kavod. If you run after kavod, kavod runs away from you. There was a chassid who went to his Rebbe and he said, Rebbe, my whole life I ran away from kavod. And we're promised that if we run away from kavod, then the kavod will pursue you. So I ran away from kavod my whole life, and yet I never got any kavod. Why? And the Rebbe said, because you were always looking over your shoulder to see if it was coming. We're supposed to be oblivious of kavod. Yet we need it. We need it like we need air. We're mechuyev to give kavod to the other person, even though we're supposed to run away from it ourselves. There's a certain balance there. There's a bit of a dichotomy. We need kavod, yet we can't be machshav kavod. Kavod is one of those things, moitzinas adam and olam, it will destroy his life, it will consume him. The person who runs after kavod, he can't think of anything else. But we are not exempt from giving kavod to other people, certainly our wives and our husbands. I'll give you an example. A wife prepares a dinner, perhaps in the beginning of their marriage, or at any point, and the husband comes home, he's hungry. Men are always hungry when they come home. They're hungry. And it's true. Feed that man right away. He'll calm down. So she worked very hard to prepare a dinner. She set the table so nicely. First thing he does is, she serves the soup. He pours salt in. He doesn't even taste it. He just pours that salt in, right? As if he's working for the city. And then he says, soup is cold. Soup is cold. Soup's not cold, he's cold. And he doesn't even think about what went into this. And even if it isn't as tasty as he would like it to be, so what? Focus on your wife, on what went into it, the love that she put into it, the energy she put into it, how her pride is involved in this. Or I'll give you a different example. A husband is asked to speak at a Sheva Brachas. He doesn't have the opportunity to speak that often, but his friend got married, they asked him to speak, this is his big chance. So he gets up to speak and his wife is in the audience. After he sits down, he would love to hear from his wife how wonderful his speech was, how proud she was of him, how everybody laughed at the joke, and the Torah that he says was so well received, and he instead she says the joke really bombed. My gosh. And now you know why my wife didn't come. She didn't want to be embarrassed. And the vart that you said, oh, nobody understood what you were talking about. And you forgot to thank the host. And the gematria you said was 6 off. And he needed to hear that he was great. She didn't focus on the depth of the matter. It's a lack of communication. It's a lack of kavod. We have to, not that we have to lie, we shouldn't lie, but we need to be smart about our relationships. C number 7, conglomerate, corporation. We join together as one. We share everything. A couple that has a good marriage, they could just about predict what the other is going to say. It's not Ruach HaKodesh, it's not that they are prophets. They've just really linked together. Their neshamas joined ranks. There's a story about an Israeli soldier in the Yom Kippur War. He was injured in the hospital. And they came to tell him the unfortunate news that they believed that his brother was a casualty at war, and that he was in the morgue in the basement of the hospital. And they asked his permission if they could come back in an hour and take him downstairs in a wheelchair to the morgue so that he could identify his brother. They came back in an hour, and the Israeli soldier says that he's not going. He says, why aren't you going? We need this. We need you to identify him. He said, because I thought about it, and I decided, how can I go down to the morgue to identify my brother if I know that I shall rejoice if he's not my brother? Because even if he's not my brother, he's another Jew. And that's how we should ideally think about one another. We're brothers and sisters. We're all one unit, one family. Kal v'chomer, husband and wife. Ishtay kegufa, bala kegufa. We're a corporation. We're a conglomerate. We're connected. There there was a couple, an elderly couple standing in line at McDonald's. And there was a young fellow behind them, and the young fellow couldn't help but overhear their order. The old man ordered 1 hamburger, 1 cheeseburger, 1 portion of French fries, and 1 soft drink with 2 cups. And the young fellow had such rachmanis on, they probably don't get a Social Security check anymore. They can't afford just this meager meal for the 2 of them. He wanted to do something, so he watched them, and he saw the old man take the meager portion to the table, and he took the cheeseburger and he cut it exactly in half, and he put half in front of his wife and half in front of himself, very tenderly. And then he counted the French fries, 1 for you, 1 for me, 1 for you, 1 for me, exactly. And then he poured the soft drink into the other cup, exactly 50% for himself, 50% for his wife. Every time I tell this story, my wife says, "What's the big deal? Every time we go out to eat, you do that." It's not true. I always take more French fries for myself. So the young guy couldn't help himself. He went over to the table and he said, "Sir, please, it would be my greatest honor and pleasure. Let me buy you another portion, please." And the old man stood up and he said, "Absolutely not. For 50 years, it's been 50-50. That's how it's always been, and that's how it will always be." And he sat down to eat, and his wife just sat there with her hands folded in her lap. She didn't eat at all. So he said to her, "Ma'am, aren't you going to eat?" She says, "Not yet. It's his turn to use the teeth." I am not suggesting that ishtay kegufo means ad kedei kach. But it's everything but teeth. And we're back to teeth again, aren't we? It's everything but teeth. It's a real fusion of oneness. This corporation, this new unit, this unit of united forces, of koiches hanefesh, interacting and being mechazek one another. The Gemara says that the greatest generation of Torah was the generation of Rabbi Yehuda Rabbi Eloi. Rabbi Yehuda Rabbi Eloi lived in a very impoverished generation. 6 students had to share 1 blanket. There was only 1 blanket for 6 students. And one would think that the reason that generation was lauded as the greatest generation of Torah is because even though they were so poor, they still persevered and they studied and they studied and they studied in spite of their poverty. And that does make sense. But Rabbi Kurland says a different shot. He says the greatness of that generation was 6 students had to share 1 blanket, and every one of them was covered. Everyone made sure that the other was covered. And you know that when you're sleeping, it's so easy to pull the blanket to yourself and just claim that you weren't conscious at the time. 6 shared a blanket and everyone was covered. That was the greatness of that generation.